They were all dead, all but her. Their grim fates had become tormenting demons in her mind, which would never cease to haunt her. She was doomed to relive the horrors of her past over and over for the rest of her life. The blazing sun had the entire prairie in its hellish grasp. Everything was silent, apart from the distant shriek of buzzards circling in the azure sky. Ingrid Nordholm peered down over the landscape from the high cliffs where she straddled her white horse. The sun had been beating down on them mercilessly all morning. Sweat ran down her forehead, along her sharp, beautiful features. She leaned down to the saddlebag and grabbed her gourd canteen. She uncorked it, took off her brown hat, drank a few gulps, and washed away the beads of sweat from her face with a splash of water. The coolness of the water was enough to bring her relief despite its small ration. All her senses regained their focus. Before putting the canteen back, she stroked a wet hand through her long blonde hair. Then she replaced her hat and leaned forward, sprinkling a little water on Midwinter. Grand and regal he stood, serene with an ivory mane. He was a snow-white gelding that had belonged to Ingrid since he was a little foal. He was the only living being left from her old life, and she loved him above all else in this world. Ingrid briefly closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to wonderful memories from the time before. Not even the buzzards shrieked now. There was nothing but complete silence, except Ingrid was suddenly snapped out of her memories by a dull rumbling. It seemed to be coming from the east. The sound was familiar, horse hooves. Immediately she fixed her eyes in the direction of the sound. From her saddlebag she produced a collapsible brass spyglass that she extended to its full length. She set it against her right eye and looked. Out of the long streak of sand-colored dust now materializing in the distance, she was indeed able to discern a stagecoach pulled by 6 horses. Ingrid wasted no time. She pulled her Smith & Wesson Schofield .45 from its holster, aimed overhead, and fired once. The bang echoed across the landscape, but the stagecoach was too far away for the passengers to hear it. Ingrid vigilantly observed its course to be really certain this was the case. Behind her, the clattering sound of hoofbeats approached. With thundering force, the hoofs struck the ground until a grand black horse and its rider finally reached the cliff. They halted beside Ingrid. She put on an oblivious expression, but it was merely superficial. The price of having the devil herself as a guardian was awe. Ingrid always felt ill at ease in her presence. But if her only choices were to probably survive in her guardian's company or to certainly perish without it, she would without hesitation pick the first alternative. Before Ingrid was given time to point in the direction of the stagecoach, the tiny, slender woman on the black horse snatched the spyglass from her hand and set it against her eye. Ingrid glanced at her. She was buck-toothed and crooked-nosed and had a weak chin, far from a pretty lady. "Dar, Mary, see," Ingrid said eagerly and pointed at the faraway stagecoach. "Do see?" "Hell, I ain't blind, you foreign mutt," the other croaked in irritation as her eye caught it. "Nor am I deef, so there ain't much point in repeating yourself. Now come on, giant, we ain't got all day," she said, gesturing to Ingrid. Her nasal voice, deep and gravelly, was wrapped in a thick southern accent. Mary Smith moved her horse sideways a few steps and was about to ride down the steep hill when Ingrid asked her to wait. Was it really such a good idea to rob a stagecoach when they already had a large posse on their heels? She humbly asked, her words barely making any sense. "Bunch of law dogs can't catch us gals even if they tries to," Mary snapped, once she understood, staring at Ingrid with hateful eyes. "So just shut that damn square-head yap of yourn till I says elsewise, and stick to the dern plan, all right?" "Understand?" "Understand. Sorry." Ingrid avoided Mary's eyes, but nodded acceptance. She glanced at Mary's horse, a tremendous stallion known as Loco. The horse was a fearsome and grotesque creature. Deep, ugly scars, likely caused by the lash of a whip and various sharp objects, marked its entire body, revealing a history of fierce torment. The right half of its face was severely charred and disfigured. Skin and flesh had melted into a disgusting mess of black and pink, whose numb, dry surfaces was rife with old blisters. One of its eyes was milky, making the animal half blind. Its right ear was gone, the auditory canal exposed. The pain its mutilated body caused made the creature's only intact eye to explode in a fiery wave of uncontrollable rage. He went crazy when anyone approached him, and Ingrid had always been sensible enough to keep herself away from him. But even Loca wouldn't dare other than blind obedience when Mary fixed her eyes on him. They were strongly bound to one another by mutual respect. Ingrid had sensed that bond very early on, but had first mistaken it for fear on the animal's part before she eventually came to realize the truth. For never even once had she seen Mary intentionally bring harm to her horse. She didn't even wear spurs. And despite the rage and depravity beyond sanity within Mary, these days Ingrid knew that whoever had inflicted the injuries on the creature, it was not the Southern woman. No more words were spoken between the two women. Instead, they took a leap downhill and set out in pursuit of the stage. From inside the rocking Concord stagecoach, Louis McNeil admired the vast grassy expanses. It was only 10:30 a.m. He had glanced at his gold pocket watch at least 5 times in the last half hour, just to make sure the stagecoach was keeping schedule. It currently was, and he ardently hoped they'd reach their destination before evening, lest they would once again have to endure another terrible and cold freezing night in this cramped conveyance, trying to get some sleep while it was constantly swinging and swaying. Should they not make it, though, perhaps they would at least reach another station before nightfall. They had made irregular stops at stations to change horses, and also sometimes for meals. Baked beans and coffee had often been on the menu. Why wasn't there a railroad to Wilder's Calm? He asked himself. The train offered better food, more comfort, and a much faster trip than an old stagecoach. Louis's adorable wife, Cassie, was pregnant and in the 3rd trimester. She had from the beginning opposed giving up safe Weymouth in favor of the lawless frontier. What could possibly be found there except a repulsive pack of outlaws, crazy old vagrants, trigger-happy cowboys, and foul prostitutes? It was certainly not an appropriate environment for a child and its mother, but Louis had insisted, claiming there was undeveloped potential in the region. A man with vision and a solid education to back it up had every chance of succeeding. Or so he used to say. Reluctantly, she had finally given in to his plans, but not until he'd first promised to build her a big, elegant house. Besides, based on personal history, his ideas seldom failed, and somewhere she was convinced that this one would work out as well. She needed only to give him her full-hearted support, no matter how hard the conditions might turn out to be. She sat quietly in the rear seat, embroidering. Few words had been spoken between them this morning. Sleeping, reading, or viewing the landscape had replaced conversation. Along with Weymouth, Louis had left behind a decent career as a banker at one of the town's most reputable banks. The moment Cassie's pregnancy became known, he started thinking of ways to improve upon his life and career. He came to the conclusion that the best thing would be to start his own bank. This would, of course, mean a great deal of hard work, at least initially. On the other hand, he reckoned that over time there would be increasing business and enough profit. He would hire a clerk, maybe 2, that could help him to unload the burden a little, instead enabling him to spend more time with his wife and child. He was already 32. It was time to settle down once and for all. Any other man in these circumstances would probably have reasoned in a whole different way than Louis did. Dragging one's far pregnant wife into the wilderness and putting her and the child's safety at risk were, among friends and family, considered a bold move. Foolish, even. But this hardly rocked his determination. He would at any cost have his bank established and operating before someone else with the same idea got there first. And the sooner the better, for tomorrow it could be too late. He had already taken care of all the necessary arrangements. Several investors stood ready to back him up financially once he'd gotten started. "Do you think we'll be happy there?" his wife suddenly asked, looking doubtfully at him. "Truly, I mean." "Of course, dearest, of course," He answered absently, his mind 1,000 miles away, but then he turned his head and gave her his undivided attention. Cassie noticed this, so she continued, "Let me once again point out that I am still a bit skeptical of all this, and I most certainly do not agree that this land of outlaws will be a proper environment for a child to grow up in. But I love you, and if this is your wish, I will stand behind you no matter what." "I love you too, sweetheart, and you're a good wife. But let me assure you, there's no need to worry. Wilder's Calm is a civilized town. Just trust me on this one." "I do. Had I not, I wouldn't be here." "I know that." Lewis paused, leaned forward, and tenderly pressed her hand. "But I promise you this, dear, that I will do everything in my power to provide safety to you and our child." Suddenly the stage lurched forward, interrupting their conversation, before jerking backward. The sturdy man next to Cassie was jolted from his sleep. "What the hell's happening?" he shouted drowsily, bracing himself. His weary eyes swept the coach body's cramped interior. Then they fell on Cassie, and he hurried to apologize for cursing in her presence. She smiled and nodded indulgently. "It seems we bumped over one of those rocks again, Sheriff," Lewis said, a wry smile on his face. Barry Sullivan was in his late 50s and sported a walrus mustache. Like his fellow passengers, he was on his way to Wilder's Calm, where he was the sheriff. In Lewis's opinion, he was a righteous and polite man, and properly dressed as well, at least for a sheriff. Lewis always relied on the first impression, and Mr. Sullivan had surely made an astounding one. Even before the journey, he had made his way over to the couple to present himself. He had shaken Lewis's hand with a firm grip. Then he had congratulated them on their pregnancy and helped Cassie up into the stagecoach. With the ice broken, their long journey had provided plenty of time for conversations, amusing as well as serious ones, most of which had naturally come to revolve around Wilder's Calm. The stagecoach still kept schedule. Excellent, Lewis thought as he put his watch back into his brocaded vest. It was now 10:50. Cassie giggled at something funny Sheriff Sullivan had just said. Not in the mood to hear yet another of Sullivan's poor attempts at wit, Lewis was just about to ask him if any heathens, Indians more specifically, inhabited these lands, when a number of deafening gunshots interrupted. The first 3 shots sounded as if they were coming from above the stage. The rest seemed to come from somewhere near behind it. Barry reached for the Colt on his hip. He turned toward his 2 companions. "Now listen careful," he gravely instructed. "Keep away from the windows. Lay down and cover your heads as best you can." His unarmed hand impatiently gestured them to take cover. "Sheriff, what in heaven's name is going on?" Lewis asked nervously, looking around. Could it really be Indians? Memories of numerous newspaper reports of robbed stagecoaches and slaughtered passengers flashed through his mind. He remembered one article about a whole company being murdered by vicious Indians somewhere in Arkansas. They had been scalped alive before being mutilated and left to die. The stagecoach bumped into something again. This time it didn't feel like a rock. The gunfire ceased as suddenly as it had begun. "Mr. McNeil, please! We're in a troublesome situation here, so I'm begging you, please do as I tell you and get down." The couple finally obeyed and crouched down in the cramped stagecoach. Lewis tried to calm his frightened wife the best he could, whispering to her, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. I love you." But since he was terrified himself, the words provided little comfort. It sounded more like he was trying to convince himself than his wife. "We should have never moved. Why did I give in to this? Never again." Cassie kept whispering in her state of shock. She lay curled up on the floor, whimpering and shaking. "Now stay down while I go out and make sure Chad's all right," said Barry. "What?" Lewis shouted. "Are you insane? You can't just leave us here." "I must, but I'll soon be back. Trust my word for it." Barry paused and pointed at Cassie. "Right now, you need to take care of your pretty wife. She relies on you, all right?" Lewis closed his eyes, clenched his teeth, and inhaled deeply. Then he gave a nod for answer. Through one of the windows, Barry glimpsed a blonde, gun-carrying woman on a white horse. He quickly realized there wasn't a chance he could make it to Chad, unless he shot the woman. But a miss would likely result in another crossfire, putting the lives of his fellow passengers at further risk. He needed to draw her attention away from them. Outside, A brief crossfire had occurred, 9 or 10 shots fired in all. After the driver had drawn his gun and opened fire at her, Mary had shot twice and missed, but her third shot had hit him in the back. He had fallen face forward before landing in front of the stagecoach, where he was crushed under the wheels. Despite her long, wine-red skirt, Mary had still been able to leap from the back of her horse over to the leather rear boot of the swaying stagecoach, and without so much as a scratch, even though it still traversed the rugged prairie at perilous speed. Mary persistently clung to the back of the unmanned stagecoach, all the while holding her Winchester repeating rifle in a firm grip. Her body dangled like a rag doll's and whipped violently each time the wagon shook. Yet she soon made it onto the roof, where trunks and luggage were tightly secured by ropes. Loco raced alongside the stagecoach. Barry, looking out the window, was taken by surprise when he saw the lone black horse. He suspected its rider might be atop the stagecoach. He carefully opened the door, swiftly looked around, then raised his head above the roof to see if Chad was still there. He wasn't. Mary was, however, and before he knew it, he was staring into the barrel of her rifle. The last thing he saw was a look of cold hatred that flashed from Mary's green eyes. With a bang, Barry Sullivan's face exploded. Blood, teeth, and chunks of flesh sprang in all directions. His body instantly went slack and fell off the stagecoach. Mary casually wiped his blood off her rifle with her blouse tail before moving over to the driver's box. Once she grabbed the reins, it didn't take long for her to stop the stagecoach. Ingrid rode up to it and dismounted. It might be witchcraft, the tall Swede thought, seeing how quickly Mary had been able to take control of the spooked horses. There were times when Ingrid was convinced that Mary must be a witch. Mary leapt down off the coach and opened the door. "Get the hell out, y'all," she instructed the frightened passengers, waving her rifle. Cautiously, the couple alighted from the carriage, Cassie with her terrified eyes entirely fixed on the ground. Protectively, Lewis laid one hand on her shoulder and held her hand with the other. The whole time, Mary had her rifle aimed at them. As soon as they were out of the stagecoach, she instructed them to put their hands in the air. "What's your name, mister?" "McNeil. Lewis McNeil." He stuttered in desperation. "Please, I beg you, don't hurt." "Why, awful nice meeting you, Lewis McNeil," Mary interrupted. She nodded toward Cassie, but without taking her eyes off him. "And what about that there one?" "Her name is Cassie. She's my wife." Cassie now raised her head and looked at Mary, still frightened but no longer in shock. Mary, on her side, observed the couple from head to foot. They seemed wealthy, she thought, but not overly pompous. Then she laid her eyes on something gleaming. She moved over to Lewis and grabbed the embossed gold watch out of the pocket of his brocaded vest. "This sure looks valuable, Mr. McNeil," she said. "Real gold?" "Yes." Mighty fine looking indeed." Mary held the shiny watch up against the sky, grimacing as she admired it. The sun seemed to caress its shiny surface. "So where's all your money? And don't goddamn tell me there ain't none, 'cause then you'd be lying, and I don't take kindly to such manners." It's inside the wagon." "Well, don't you say?" Mary laughed dryly. "I meant where in the darn stage am I supposed to look for 'em?" "Beneath one of the seats, in a brown leather bag." "Ingrid, tote that sorry ass of yourn over yonder, you big lummox." Mary gestured to Ingrid, who immediately climbed into the stage and began searching. It didn't take her long to find it. The moment she opened the bag, her eyes widened and her beautiful face shone like the sun. Now Mary would be pleased enough to spare the couple. Mary noticed Ingrid's reaction. She backed up in her direction, the rifle still aimed at the McNeil couple. The bag was loaded with cash. It had to be $20,000 or $30,000. "We got the money, Mary. Let's go." "Shut the hell up, Ingrid. I'm in charge round here, and I says take that there bag, unhitch 'em goddamn hosses from the dern stagecoach, and send 'em off. Got that?" "All right, Mary," Ingrid replied. "But please, don't hurt the folk. We only here for the dollar money. Remember, do." Mary turned and fixed Ingrid with a glare so unnerving that it drove the Swede off in an instant, eyes downcast and with a worried look. Mary again moved over to Lewis. "Please don't hurt us. You've got what you wanted," begged Lewis. "You sure this is all?" she asked, ignoring the man's appeal. Yes, I swear by God it is. My wife, she's with child. At least let her and the baby be." On a sudden whim, Mary began waving her rifle in front of Lewis's face, obviously taking pleasure in tormenting the defenseless man. "I really despise your sort, Mr. McNeil. You know why?" she asked in an eerie voice. She waited for a no, but when she didn't receive it, she calmly went on. "'Cause y'all come here with your golden watches, your money, and fancy clothes, and then you step and spit on my sort, just 'cause we ain't as fancy as y'all. Goddamn Yankee tenderfoots. And you know what else, Mr. McNeil? I don't reckon you and your pretty little missus done set foot in the wilderness before. I can tell, just by looking at y'all. Hell, even a blind buffalo could tell. Yet you and your sort keep on coming here, acting like you owns the whole goddamn prairie. You want to know what became of your feller passenger?" No. Lewis knew that Barry Sullivan was dead, but he didn't want to hear any grisly details, and he certainly didn't want Cassie to. "No? Ain't you and that fancy little missus of yourn even a mite curious over his fate? Well, I'll tell you anyway." "Please, don't." "I was aiming my rifle at his'n face, just the way I'm aiming it at yourn this very moment." "Please, I'm begging you." "And then I squeezed the trigger and blowed his whole head off." Upon hearing this, Cassie bent over and vomited. Lewis's legs felt weak, and he struggled to stand. His reddened face was damp with tears and sweat, features contorted in fear and terror. He made an utmost effort not to fall, not for his own sake, but for Cassie's. Whatever preventing the ounce of sanity there still remained in Mary from temporarily slipping away was once again gradually succumbing to the vile, dark perversion of immense might that resided in the woman's mind, making her do evil. And she welcomed it, making no effort to subdue it, because it was liberating and alluring, and more importantly, it was a part of her. She was not plagued or haunted. She was blessed. Suddenly her eyes flashed. Their already small pupils contracted. To Cassie's great horror, Mary pressed the rifle muzzle against Lewis's throat and fired. There was an echoing bang. Stiff with dread, Cassie let out a shriek. The man's throat exploded and his entire body hurtled back. Yet the gunshot was neither fatal nor enough to sever his head from his body. In his shock and wounded state, Lewis was still somehow able to get to his feet. He staggered toward his wife in a desperate attempt to protect her. With both hands clutching his throat, he tried to stop the flow of blood pouring from the gaping wound, only to stumble and end up on the ground again, slowly choking to death as blood filled his lungs. In agonizing pain, he gargled a few heartbreaking sounds just before everything went black. The last thing Lewis McNeil saw was Mary shooting his transfixed wife in the abdomen with her Winchester. Ingrid had begun unharnessing the team of horses when the first gunshot sounded. Hoping to prevent disaster, she rushed to the rescue, but too late. Instead, she was forced to witness the gruesome tragedy Mary had caused. "Oh, no, Mary!" she cried out in grief. "No! Why? Why do murder them? Why, Mary?" There was no response. She couldn't understand what drove the woman to such horrific violence, and never had. Ingrid herself had shot a few people during her riding days with Mary, but only to wound them when she was being shot at herself. She had never shot an unarmed person, and she certainly hadn't murdered anyone for the mere sake of it. The only times she had opened fire were when Mary's life and hers were at stake. Once or twice the idea of killing Mary had crossed her mind, but she was too much of a coward. She also knew too well that she would never be able to survive one day in this harsh land without Mary. And besides, she was in the woman's debt and had even bonded with her. Ingrid more or less considered Mary a friend, even though she knew the feelings were hardly mutual. Ingrid quietly withdrew to her assignment. Anxious, she kept glancing at Mary, whose mind was somewhere far away in a state of exhilaration and madness. Trying to argue with her just after a killing could bring on a bad reaction. Ingrid knew that from experience. One time, Mary had hurled a coffee pot full of boiling water at her, nearly scalding her. It had missed her by only inches. Mary whistled for Loco. Obediently, the horse came running. She found a rock to stand on as she placed her foot into the stirrup and mounted the giant horse. Once horseback, she put her rifle back in its saddle scabbard and took a drink of water from her canteen. Ingrid finished unharnessing the horses from the stagecoach, sent them off, and called for her own horse. "We done," said Mary as soon as Ingrid got into her saddle. "Let's get the hell out of here." "There to?" "Why, to the destination of that there coach, of course. Wilder's Calm. Don't know about you, but me, I aim to get myself steadily drunk and then go looking for some fancy clothes, tobacco, and real grub. We just got ourselves bucks aplenty, and I mean to spend each darn cent of 'em." The horse's hooves stirred up clouds of dust as the two riders set their course toward Wilder's Calm. As they rode, Ingrid tried to assuage her guilt over the dead McNeil couple.